Some authors impact a genre so deeply, their work actually helps to define what that genre is. When we think about science fiction, we wouldn't think about it in quite the same way without the writings of Arthur C. Clarke. For movie fans, Clarke is best known for co-scripting Stanley Kubrick's revolutionary sci-fi epic 2001: A Space Odyssey, which he concurrently adapted into a novel. Both book and movie crafted equally stunning visions of plausible space travel, abstract alien contact, and transcendent human evolution, setting a new standard in science fiction storytelling. Much of the credit for 2001's brilliance justifiably goes to Kubrick, whose flawless technical precision did much to elevate the material, but there's no doubt the movie would not have been the artistic breakthrough that it was without Clarke, whose originality and power as a storyteller always found its strongest expression in his prolific literary career. No other adaptation of his work came close to matching 2001, though to be fair, that level of achievement has always been extremely rare. Still, Clarke's masterful stories often had that potential for greatness. More often than not, no matter how much interest they continuously generated, his greatest books would never be filmed within his lifetime. The longest history of the bunch is probably Childhood's End, one of the best alien invasion novels ever written and one of the author's darkest and most haunting stories. Despite being filmed as a Syfy Channel miniseries in 2015, the book and its adaptation arguably remain a work of unfulfilled genius. This is the production history of Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End. The novels of Arthur C. Clarke, along with those of Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein, more or less transformed science fiction from a denigrated pulp genre into a respectable modern literary tradition. Masterpieces like The City and the Stars, 2001 and its sequels, and Rendezvous with Rama showcased Clarke's superlative talent for creating fantastic worlds and concepts grounded in real science, physics, and engineering. His realism was bolstered by a boundless imagination. Clarke's work often took readers from the quotidian details of space travel into the mind-bending abstractions of the philosophical and the metaphysical, asking the biggest possible questions about the meaning and origin of intelligence and existence. Clarke's work was hopeful and optimistic, always assuming the best about the future and humanity, and encouraging a sense of wonder and curiosity about the universe. In this way, he epitomized the best qualities of space-age-era science fiction. Childhood's End both reflects and subverts these qualities. Published in 1953, before the space race truly began, it was one of Clarke's earliest and most acclaimed novels, and his first bestseller. The plot was an ingenious twist on the alien invasion tale, imagining what might happen to human culture and civilization if Earth were suddenly occupied by an extraterrestrial race so technologically advanced that resistance not only became futile, but literally impossible. The book opens with mankind's first incipient space missions being interrupted and ultimately superseded by the arrival of the Overlords, a mysterious and almost godlike alien species that, with little effort and essentially no violence, succeeds in conquering and colonizing the entire planet. The real story begins in the aftermath, as the Overlords reveal themselves to be a seemingly benevolent presence. They abolish all war, end poverty and hunger, and quickly transform the Earth into a utopia. People react with ambivalence. There is comfort and prosperity for all, yet no true freedom, no drive for self-actualization. The Overlord's true motivation, purpose, even their actual appearance is kept secret from the population. Beneath everything lies some sort of ominous puzzle, which our main characters, a diplomat named Stormgren and an astrophysicist named Rodericks, are determined to investigate. This was a refreshing break from the endlessly imitated blueprint pioneered by H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds around the turn of the century. Clarke forgoes expose the usual scenes of physical destruction and warfare to focus instead on psychology, character development, and the application of reason. At heart, his story was a mystery, exploring the complexities of human nature. In its awe-inspiring final revelation, it also turned out to be much darker than most of Clarke's other stories. The climax of the book reveals that the Overlord's true mission is to guide humanity into the next stage of their evolution, a process that involves a final generation of human children shedding everything about themselves that is recognizably human. It's a breathtaking mixture of chilling existentialism and grandiose imagination, written with a descriptive power and creative vision that borders at times on the experimental. The book is one of the high points of Clarke's career and ranks among the best science fiction ever written. There was almost immediate interest in adapting Childhood's End as a film. Clarke wrote in an introduction to a reprint of the book, published appropriately enough in the year 2001, that it eventually passed through innumerable hands and was translated into countless screenplays. One of these, which Clarke himself claims to have collaborated on at an unspecified time, was by screenwriter Howard Koch, the man who had previously adapted War of the Worlds into the infamous 1938 radio drama performed by Orson Welles. For a brief period, even Stanley Kubrick was interested. When Kubrick originally met with Clarke around 1964 to talk about the collaboration that would eventually become 2001, Kubrick first suggested they work on a film version of Childhood's End. That plan was abandoned after they discovered someone else already owned the rights. 2001's plot eventually found its basis in Clarke's earlier 1951 short story, The Sentinel, and the person who inadvertently stopped Kubrick from making Childhood's End? That would be writer-director Abraham Polonsky, an overlooked and thoroughly fascinating figure in his own right. Polonsky had made his directorial debut in 1948 with the very underappreciated film noir Force of Evil, before being blacklisted from Hollywood during the communist scare. After spending about 20 years rewriting and selling screenplays anonymously, he was finally afforded the opportunity to return to directing in 1969, with the politically charged western Tell Them Willie Boy Is Here. As he prepared to release his next film, the 1971 adventure Romance of a Horse Thief, it was reported that Polonsky had 3 new productions in the works: an adaptation of Thomas Mann's Mario and the Magician, a version of the Ramayana, and Childhood's End. According to an article on Mental Floss, Polonsky actually managed to complete a screenplay for Childhood's End, apparently co-written with Howard Koch, the same man Clarke supposedly worked with at some point, either on a different screenplay or maybe the same one. It's unclear. But then a history like this wouldn't be complete without a few discrepancies. None of Polonsky's planned projects were ever able to move forward, and Romance of a Horse Thief wound up being his final directorial effort. By 1975, Childhood's End had passed into the hands of a studio, Universal Pictures. Writer-producer Gene Kearney, who'd worked on shows like Kojak and Night Gallery, took charge of development and began pushing it as a feature film. Kearney left Universal in 1977, leaving the project with writer Philip Daguerre. Like Kearney, most of Daguerre's experience was in television. His credits include Alias Smith and Jones, Simon and Simon, the 80s reboot of The Twilight Zone, and a 1978 TV movie based on Marvel's Doctor Strange, which he wrote and directed. Under Daguerre's guidance, Childhood's End finally started making some real progress, shifting from a feature film to a 6-hour miniseries for CBS television, then finally to a 2 or 3 hour telemovie for ABC. The production hit a snag in 1978 when Universal discovered some of their contracts with author Arthur C. Clarke were out of date. While lawyers spent around 9 months renegotiating, Daguerre wrote a 70-page treatment outlining his plan for the adaptation, which introduced some major structural changes to the story. Clarke's novel had divided the narrative into 3 parts. Part 1 centered on the character of Stormgren, a middle-aged diplomat and the only human permitted to meet and interact with the Overlord Supervisor of Earth, Corellin, though Corellin keeps his appearance carefully hidden. Part 2 took place around 50 years later. Stormgren has died, and the Overlords have revealed their physical form, which turns out to be forebodingly demon-like. Several important new characters are introduced, but the most significant turns out to be Roderick's, a a young astrophysicist who comes to believe that he has discovered the location of the Overlord's home planet. After hatching a plan to stow away on one of the alien ships, which leads to his discovery of their true purpose, Roderick's returns in Part 3, 80 years Earth time later, and finds he is the only true human being left in the universe. Daguerre felt the story needed a stronger connecting link between these different sections. He decided to make Roderick the story's lead character, introducing him earlier in Part 1 and making his arc the emotional through line. By early 1979, the contractual issues had been settled, and Daguerre began turning his treatment into a full screenplay. To develop the visual side, he hired conceptual artist Neil Adams, who would also work on an unmade adaptation of Alfred Bester's The Star's My Destination in the 90s. Conscious of contributing images that would help to tell the story, Adams created extensive artwork visualizing the Overlord ships. The interiors had an open, three-dimensional layout, absent of stairs or lifts, the idea being they were made to accommodate beings with the ability to fly. For the ship's external appearance over the Earth's cities, Adams realized they should be partially obscured by clouds, in order to convey their mind-boggling size. He even designed and built an effect for realizing the Overlords themselves, a telescoping system that would have allowed an actor to be fitted with realistic folding wings. Daguerre contacted Arthur C. Clarke and received his approval for the adaptation, but the production was unable to approve its budget with Universal. Their telemovie had been budgeted at $10 million, and Daguerre estimated they would probably need closer to $40 million to make it happen. The project languished. In 1981, Daguerre said that although the studio was showing interest, the story was still too odd and the price tag too high for a full commitment. As time passed, inevitably, certain ideas and images started popping up elsewhere that seemed to owe some of their origin to Childhood's End. Adams claims his original designs were quite similar to the effects work done for the 1983 miniseries V, and even Arthur C. Clarke couldn't help commenting on some similarities found in Independence Day. Before all the explosions start, Roland Emmerich's 1996 blockbuster actually featured some breathtaking opening scenes that weren't too far off in tone from Clarke's book. In 2002, Universal finally revived Childhood's End as a film project, with Boys Don't Cry director Kimberly Peirce attached. Peirce was a surprising choice, a visceral boundary pusher with an impressive knack for hard-hitting drama. She didn't seem an immediate fit for a science fiction story, but given the unusual qualities of Clarke's book, Peirce could have proven unusually apt for the task. Little developed after the announcement, but Peirce was still talking about her plans for the adaptation after completing her second film, Stop Loss, in 2008. The same year, author Arthur C. Clarke passed away. Then, around 2013, something changed. Television was rapidly expanding as a medium, making Childhood's End suddenly seem less out of reach. Universal passed the property over to the Syfy channel, who hired producer Michael DeLuca, who hired writer Matthew Graham, and together, they made it happen. With relative ease and speed. Childhood's End was released as a completed miniseries in 2015, the end result of over 60 years of development, delays, and false starts. It's an achievement to respect, but it doesn't quite realize the potential that had been lying dormant for so long within the book. Adaptation is a tricky business. You can change just a little and get it completely wrong, or you can change a whole lot and still somehow get it exactly right. It simply depends on how faithful every choice is to the story's original intent. Childhood's End falls somewhere in the middle. Syfy's three-part miniseries maintains most of the basic structure of Clarke's original story, with surprisingly few alterations. The period has been updated to the present day, some additional backstory has been given to the characters, and similar to what Philip Daguerre planned back in the 70s, major players like Stormgren and Roderick are made central figures from beginning to end. Little has been dropped, quite a few things have actually been added. There's a greater focus on religious backlash, which becomes a main subplot, and Stormgren has a much larger arc involving memories of his dead wife and a mysterious illness threatening his life, which of course turns out to have something to do with the Overlord Supervisor of Earth, Corellin. As big as some of these additions are, none of it breaks the overall bones of the story. Events play out in much the same way as the book, and everything builds to the same devastating climax. It appears a pretty faithful rendering of Clarke's intentions, but emotionally, something's missing. Even though there's more going on in the plot, it feels less interesting. And even with the same conclusion, it doesn't hit with the same impact as Clarke's novel. Why is that? I think I've pinpointed a few reasons. It wasn't just the story that made Clarke's book so great. An enormous part of its effect was created by the characters and their relationships, something that doesn't immediately register in the presence of a story this grand. Clarke's spectacular imagery was given a relatable human dimension by the fact that it was imagined through the eyes of very specific people. Anything we feel when we read it, awe, terror, understanding, we feel because we're empathizing with the characters. It's subtle, but Syfy's adaptation misses a few vital details about these characters. First, there's Stormgren, rewritten here to be much younger, and instead of a diplomat, he's a humble, small-town farmer. The intent is to make him more average and relatable. Instead, it just makes him more anonymous. What made Stormgren so interesting in the book was his advancing age, the weariness and perspective that came with it, the growing disillusionment with his job. Losing this not only means losing his personality, it means losing the very qualities that allow him to understand the position of the Overlord Corellin. These two characters develop an engaging affection for one another as the story progresses, and the reason they relate to each other is because, deep down, in spite of their obvious differences, they're really very similar. The miniseries doesn't capture any of the nuance of that relationship. In his performance as Corellin, Charles Dance is able to convey the required emotional notes, but it doesn't feel reciprocated. Mike Vogel does his best as Stormgren, but without an actor of comparable age and experience to match and reflect those notes, there's only so much he can do. Instead, their relationship progresses more artificially, according to the beats of plot construction. Stormgren, with his life-threatening illness, spends more time reacting to crisis than he does really getting to know Corellin. And with his constant pining for his dead wife, whatever relationship he does have to Corellin just doesn't feel as important. Then there's Rodericks. In the book, Rodericks was defined by his intrepid spirit. Feeling that mankind has lost a fundamental curiosity and resolve, the fuel of previous centuries of scientific advancement, Rodericks voluntarily chooses to turn his back on the universal comfort offered by the Overlord's rule. The thought of being the first human being to leave the solar system, the first to set foot on an alien planet, drives him to stow away on an Overlord ship. Again, the series removes this defining characteristic by having Rodericks in the show reach his decision by means of plot mechanics. He glimpses a vision of Earth's destruction and, out of some vague hope of stopping it, stows away on a ship headed back to the Overlord's home planet. What exactly he hopes to find there, I'm not sure. He's looking for a solution to a problem, but I don't really see how he expects to find one. It's hard to understand because it doesn't happen for any other reason than the plot requires it. He doesn't make the decision because of who he is or what he believes. He only seems to do it because it's necessary. Clarke created sympathy and depth for Rodericks by making him an out-of-place romantic, an adventurer stuck in a time and place where adventure was vanishing. That defined who he was and the choices he made. The show expands his backstory, making him a handicapped child growing up in a poor, crime-ridden neighborhood. The Overlord's arrival on Earth opens up a whole new life for him, but this does little to help define who he is, because the story doesn't follow through on the added material in a way that meaningfully impacts his later choices. Same as Stormgren, he comes to feel like just another function in a plot. All of this bothered me a great deal, but in truth it didn't add up to catastrophe. The show still has its moments, and even when it's at its worst, it's never really that bad. There's some good effects work on the overlords, Charles Dance really does give a strong performance, and Clarke's story is so interesting that even in this form, it still maintains much of its interest. The sad part is, it could have been much better. With a stronger vision, a better script, a more focused, insightful hold on the story and the characters, it could have been great. I think in this instance, the miniseries format worked against it. There are too many unnecessary subplots, too much extra material that only distracts from the key ingredients. The visual impact is also lessened by the more modest budgetary level of television. As much as the medium has advanced in the last decade, it's still hard to reach the level of polish you get with movies. Most likely, this is why the show drops what is probably the best sequence in the book, describing the overwhelming sights Roderick's encounters on the Overlord's home planet. There's a visit to a sort of zoo containing alien life forms, some of which are so strange and unfamiliar, Roderick's actually feels a quasi-Lovecraftian sense of cosmic horror just looking at them. Then there's a cryptic encounter with a non-physical being called the Overmind, an experience of such intense dread it shakes Roderick's to his very core. It's the moment that finally drives home for him just how small and insignificant human beings are within the unknowable vastness of the universe. And it's when he understands that to be human is to be, in a way, limited, motivating his return to Earth. These passages would be incredibly difficult to replicate on screen. Much of their power comes through Clarke's exceptional prose. If it could be put in the hands of the right director, it has the potential to be extraordinary. The miniseries gives it a good effort, but it leaves the greatness of the book largely untouched. I believe there's still a lot that can be done with Childhood's End, and I hope to see it in another adaptation. I don't expect to see it anytime soon, but that's the nice thing about great books. They never really go away.